Here we are, finally. Well, I just spent the last 20 minutes trying to get into the live stream here. Um, Totally bizarre. And maybe some people will actually show up because I was here 20 minutes ago trying to get this thing together. Okay, we got a couple of thumbs up. Really strange. So when I started the live stream tonight, it was kicking me over. I have a couple of other YouTube channels that I don't use, and it just kicked me over to this other YouTube channel. There, hi Judy. Yeah, yeah. So it was really strange tonight. I don't want to say that they were messing with me, but it kind of felt that way. I don't want to go all paranoid on this. What's going on, cheeky monkey? Hello there. Hi Sally. Yeah. So there was just like, oh, it's Scoobs. Hi Scoobs. Yes, it was just really strange. I've been here since 10 after 8 trying to get this thing off the ground and just kept putting me into one of my other channels. Weird stuff, but what do you expect? It's the internet, it's YouTube, and we're in very strange times. So I'm just going to allow people to kind of show up here and kind of congregate for a little bit. Again, my apologies for being late, but it's better than 10 o'clock at night, right? At least when I have that 8 target time, we get kind of close to it. It's not a bad thing. There's Madeline. Hello, Madeline. Give y'all. I like that. Good evening. Hey, Lori, what's going on? There's Lori. So I was watching. Any of you watch Dark Journalist? You almost went to bed. You can't go to bed. You could, Lynn, but you'd miss out on a little party here. Anybody ever watch Dark Journalist on YouTube? So he appeared out of nowhere. Sometimes he appeared out of nowhere, and haven't watched for a while. I was watching this show that he did the other night. It was a live stream. Never heard of him. Yeah, so he's doing this live stream. He has Catherine. So I was talking with Emily late last night, and she has a theory that Catherine Austin Fitts is backing Dark Journalist, and that Joseph Farrell might be in on it too, that they're kind of backing him. I have no proof of that, but it sounds actually kind of right, because he popped up out of nowhere, started doing his stuff. But he had a live stream the other night that had like 500 comments. It was like off the hook, 50,000 people. She does a lot of interviews with him. Hi, Suze. You like my headphones? Yeah, they are Fry's Electronics Special. Alexandra Bruce. Yeah, she's on. So he did this show about Trump and Tesla and Nixon, which I saw part of, and it was like, what's, I mean, most of us, you got it, no more head cold. Yes, shoot, man, that head cold lasted a long time. Most of us, if you're on the fringe and you're following the fringe, it's like you knew about the Tesla and Trump stuff, correct? Yeah, the Nixon time capsule stuff. I mean, I think that's really sketchy. Like if you look at, the language doesn't predict that Nixon. There's no predictive language with Nixon and Trump. It's a bit of a stretch. So, here's what I see a lot of happening now. Like in the so-called truth movement, everything is in this bang and echo chamber. And nobody's really doing anything really all that interesting and new. And it seems like there's like this second and third wave of people who are coming along and catching like this new wave of people who are getting red pilled. It's very interesting to watch, right? It's sort of like, there were early adopters. Like if you look at Henrik Palmgren, who went like this, right? He had red ice and then he went off into, his white identity stuff. But Henrik was a really early adopter and doing really amazing material. And there are a lot of other people that were doing stuff like 10 years ago, 9 years ago, but it was ahead of the curve. And now there's a whole cadre of truth tellers, supposedly, who are kind of in this moment in time, excuse me, where they're not really coming up with anything new, but they've just been really regurgitating the last 8 or 9 years. Or they're taking something kind of new and they're playing ping pong with it, with all the different, people. It's a very interesting time in terms of the dissemination of news, material, truth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Um, it was just a notice. Like there was nothing in that stream that was like really out of the revelatory. I mean, but think about this now. Just in terms of where we are. We're at a point in time where we're dealing with stuff like QAnon and Kanye, and I mean, this was not happening 7 or 8 years ago. I mean, the floodgates of all this information, were not turned on. But the information is a regurgitation, I think, really in most cases of the last 10 years. I'm glad I'm not beginning to feel sorry for them. Well, yeah, but the people who are, like, I mean, you just watch, right? Like Jordan Sather uh, and um, and dark journalists. I mean, they're getting huge, huge views on YouTube, and it's because of this like second or third wave of the truth movement that is kind of exploding right now. What does Sue say? They were going in for the setup in the Nixon Elvis story, drug reform, Vietnam era crap, while Elvis is perceived as a narc and addict. Sue's is like a Elvis. Like, what would you call yourself, Sue's? Elvis aficionado? Like everything about Elvis and the mythopoesis of Elvis. Is that right? She's got like the tap on. Flat Earth sent me on my path in 2015. So I've been reading some stuff that the whole Flat Earth thing was like a CIA op. Again, take it for what it's worth. Spiritual researcher on case since 2017 with Elvis. People are in a space to hear now. Yeah, they are. People have been tenderized. So this is a really important kind of point because, like, if I was talking about this the other day, and this has to do with QAnon, and totally believe that about the flat Earth stuff. Watch a divide forms. Yeah, absolutely. They're like, all of a sudden, if you were a flat earther, you're fucked, right? You didn't get the gospel. If you aren't a QAnoner, same deal. It's just these programs that come in and divide and conquer and divide and conquer, and I think that they're operations. I think they're totally psychological operations. So just be careful. Like this stuff is worth studying, but don't like Velcro anybody or anything. You had to move on, absorb everything. You just don't Velcro to stuff. That's the worst thing that you can do. And even like with my material, whatever it is I'm talking about, you know, go through your own process. Is he right? Does this resonate with me? Is he full of bullshit? Where are the dark corners here? So ultimately, what I'm trying to do, I pray for the grid to go down. Hi, Charlotte. The grid going down would be really interesting. I wouldn't really have a problem with that per se, but if that happened, just watch the movie The Road, and you'll get a very interesting kind of understanding about what life would be like post grid, because not everybody is on the same enlightened sort of path, and you'll run across people that have a very different reality. Let's put it that way. But like if the grid went down, then the money system would go down. We'd have a major reset, and it probably wouldn't be a bad thing. Just be, if it's going to happen, you better know some people, right? You better know some people. You better hook up and have people that are part of your life, and you guys can, stick together and do all the necessary things. There's strength in numbers in a situation like that. So it wouldn't be the worst thing, to be honest with you. But I'm going to tell you something right now. Okay. I wouldn't want to. Sorry, prepared or not. No hookup here. I'm going to tell you something right now. Let's take the the grid going down out of the equation. So let's say we're still rolling with this model. It's not going down. There's no events. That's another thing that's happening, right? The events. People know about the events. Is that when we finally split off into these different worlds? Is that what that's about? Kind of a version of the Matrix. It's supposed to happen like the 15th of May. And isn't that when Trump is going to Jerusalem to basically open up the new embassy? I watched a documentary on the temple last night. I watched 3 parts of it. Really fascinating. It's on Amazon, and it filled in a number of different things for me. 2 of which was the event is happening now. It's not going on with. I agree with you, Madeline. It's a great point. Excuse me. So it was really interesting, like touching, like just connecting in with the temple material and how David built the first version and then Solomon built the second version, and both times the temple was ruined because they were essentially fuck ups. They were like David. David was paranoid. He killed a lot of people. Like if somebody was going to take on David and seize the throne, he offed them. So ultimately, he had a price to pay. And then Solomon was a necromancer. He was a summoner, and he brought in all these babes from all over the region and built temples to their gods. And what did he have, like 300 wives or something like that? And then of course the temple was, first time was the Romans, the second time was the Babylonians came in. Nebuchadnezzar trashed it, and then from that point forward, it belonged to the Muslims. And what's fascinating in this documentary, I didn't know it. I didn't know this, is that the Muslims in Jerusalem claimed that there was never any temple, which I thought was really interesting. It's like that's their point of view, that the temple never really existed, and that the thing that's there is the mosque, right? Like that's the first edifice that they created. And so what happens, and again, I've never been to Jerusalem. I've never had the inclination to go there, but apparently the Wailing Wall is connected to that temple, which I did not know before. So I got a little bit of an education on that temple, and this is what's happening. I think it's going on in June, if I'm not mistaken. Of course, it's going to be a Gemini event. We have Trump the Gemini. It's a big deal, because the Israelis and Chabad believe that the third temple will also coincide with the coming of the Messiah. And we're into like Judaic prophecy and Judaic Christian prophecy, and it's all starting to line up, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But it was really, really fascinating to kind of watch the Islamic point of view. It's like temple schmemple, what temple? It's a mosque now. Get over it. It was really, really fascinating. And then this one guy came in and said, "Well, it's going to be a temple for everybody." It'll be a temple for the Jews and for the Christians and for the Muslims. And when you go there, Allah will appear. Or when you go there, Jesus will appear. Or when you go there, Yahweh. So what's going to happen? Are they going to put some holographic generators inside this thing? It's pretty impressive structure, I have to say. There's some walls in that thing that are very, very long and pretty ancient. So just spend a little time here. Anyway, getting back to kind of where we are. This is, I don't know why I brought up the temple thing. Maybe it's because it's buzzy right now. But here's my advice. If you want my advice, it's always go in the direction that other people aren't going. Okay? Remember that. If you want to really find out, where things are at on the path, go in the other direction. So when I started this in 2009, really 2009, 2010, there weren't a lot of people like doing sort of, what I was doing. And there are some now, to be honest with you. But there are people that are certainly involved in the, alternative media and truth. And, I just gave a couple of examples of people who became very popular very quickly, Jordan Sather and Dark Journalist. But now everybody's got a YouTube channel, and you've got people that are getting 25,000 views for, just basically reading QAnon sort of babble. And it's getting clear to me that it's almost becoming like, red algae. And it's completely sort of covering the ocean. So one of the things that I think could be really instructive is that when this happens, go the other way. Because number one, you'll have less people that are all congregating around the same idea. And when you get people congregating around the same idea, I don't care how theoretically liberating that idea is, it's still groupthink. You get caught up in groupthink, and then you start to defend things after a while because you're a part of the group and you've signed over your sovereignty to that idea. Then all of a sudden you are, part of a club, and it's very, very difficult to remove yourself. And the other thing too is that everything is, moving, into the box, further and deeper into the box, or further and deeper into the tablet, and further and deeper into the handheld, to the point where, we'll be, pretty soon we'll have, digital, like at some point, right? This medium that I'm in right now won't even exist. If we keep going on this path, I mean, it may be, little side channel somewhere, but I'm thinking 5 to 6 years from now that this would be a virtual reality experience that we'd all be taking part in. That's my guess. That's my hit. That's where it's all going. Okay. So my advice to you is go in the other direction. If you're, while all this is being built out electronically, digitally, technologically, go physical. If everybody is, into this kind of linear accelerator of truth, and all these atoms are smashing against each other, but there's really nothing new, right? There's really nothing new. I mean, if you spend any legitimate amount of time on YouTube going through any channels, you're not going to find anything really new. It's just, we've come to the end of this kind of propagation and circulation of ideas in some ways, right? Unless you want to get like super, 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 super esoteric. And at that point, what are you doing? You're like preaching to, a very, very small group of people who may not be able to understand the degree of the symbolism and the codification and sequence of events. And there's nothing wrong with it. I'm not saying that shouldn't be done, but there's not a whole lot new right now. Trust me, I get out there a lot. Nothing new under the sun. Yeah, there's not much. So because think of it, like George Casavillas is interesting. Yeah, he actually is interesting, Heather. I would agree with that. I've seen that guy. He's pretty interesting, I would say. You're preaching, you said preaching people are religious about not religious things. Yeah, to some extent, that's true. It's true. Um, but you can just go down the list, right? Disclosure. We've got the third temple prophecies. We've got secret space program. We've got the Nazis. We've got Antarctica. I mean, it's all out there now. It is all out there. All out there. So my advice to you is go in the other direction. Go physical. Make things. Okay. It doesn't mean you can't like stay up on what's happening in the world and find people. Um, there's more coming. Well, I hope there's more coming. I hope there's more coming. I think we've lost something now. And I think we've lost this relationship to matter. And with Uranus and Taurus, I'm hoping that we can have a radical renewal with our relationship with matter. And I think because there's something about creating something that is really powerful and empowering. When you make something, there's actual like a kind of an alchemical change inside the body. So I'm just throwing that out there. And by the way, I still think astrology is one of the absolutely best systems for guidance. So why don't we get into it? Let's talk a little astrology. Tonight, we're going to get into conjunctions. And just a couple of conjunctions that have really crossed my mind and my path lately. So I want to talk about the conjunctions. And so we'll get into them. We'll talk about that. And I've wanted to bring up some charts from some old actors, which I was looking at. I watch a lot of old movies, and I found myself resonating with people like William Holden and Glenn Ford and um, Jimmy Stewart. And so, I was going back and looking at their astrology, and I found that a lot of them were born between the signs of Aries and Gemini, which I thought was very, very interesting. And I was trying to, not everybody, of course, like Clark Gable's an Aquarius and Humphrey Bogart's a Capricorn. I think John Garfield, if I'm not mistaken, might be an Aquarius as well. So there's obviously, people that are, they're not going to conform to the mean. But I looked at this sample set. I'm like, wow, this is really interesting. This is very, very. So anyway, we're going to talk about that, and we're talking about conjunctions, and we're going to talk about maybe if I have time, but maybe I'll get into. Um, I was going to get into Willie Mays's chart, but I'm not going to do that. So let's get into this. Let's just look at the chart of the moment. So right now we're at Scorpio rising here in Central Texas, and it's at 25 degrees Scorpio rising. So we really want to pay attention to the moon because the moon is, you're going to start your day tomorrow with the moon. So what do we were in, I believe this is what, waning gibbous right now. It's at 5 degrees Aquarius. We have 1, 2, 3, 2 more signs until we get to actually 1, 2, 3 more signs until we get to balsamic, and then the new moon, which is going to be in Taurus. And if you want to do your planting, if you're late with your planting, and maybe there's a reason why, like because the weather's been entirely screwy. So the Taurus new moon, I think, would be a really good time for that to occur. And we'll look into that. We'll look at where that is. So we'll have a new moon, and we'll have that. Right now, the sun is in opposition with Jupiter, and Sun Jupiter oppositions, or just oppositions in general. I mean, maybe we should just go over them, right? So when we have an opposition, generally it is representative of an outside force. That's the nature of an opposition. So what we're trying to do with an opposition is deal with something that's coming at us. Sometimes we're not aware of it. Sometimes we can be blindsided by oppositions. If you have an opposition in your chart, like for instance, I've had a few events over the last few months with Neptune on my south node and opposing my midheaven and my true node. And to me, it's felt like walking along a beach and all of a sudden a wave hitting you, like a big wave, because it's coming from the opposite place of opposition. And that's the nature of Neptune. But with other planets, it's quite different. So, for instance, if you're dealing with a Saturnian opposition, there's a good chance you're dealing with things like governments or corporations or, excuse me, father figures, which morph into governments and corporations. So you're dealing with an external pressure that's coming at you. And those Saturn oppositions last a while. And one of the things that, so it's like, how do you reconcile an opposition? And I talk about this in my course. How you reconcile an opposition, sometimes you go from this side to this side to this side to this side and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. That's one way of doing it. Another way of reconciling opposition is finding the midpoint between the two poles and occupying that space. So that's another way of dealing with an opposition. It's a way to get out of, because oppositions create polarity. Let's say, for instance, knock on wood, you're in it with the IRS. And you're going through a Saturn opposition. Well, Saturn would represent the IRS. And so what are you doing? You're dealing with this outside force. Or it could be any other kind of, governmental or bureaucratic operation. And so you're in polarity. So, maybe you could go over to their side, say, well, let me find out what's going on over here. Instead of polarizing and trying to, hold steady, maybe I'll go over here and I'll check this out and I'll see your POV. But sometimes you can find that midpoint, say, okay, let me get above this. And the midpoint is always rounded up from the bottom part, theoretically, of the opposition. So right now we've got a Jupiter Sun opposition. If you were to go to astro.com, you would see that the ascendant right now is in Scorpio, and it is around 25 degrees. And then the sun is currently at 16 Taurus. So where's the midpoint going to be? Well, we're talking fixed sign, so it's going to be the 9th house in Leo. So it allowed you to get above the situation. Okay, so let's say you're frozen and polarized with this. I mean, obviously, maybe I don't know, maybe let's make this Saturn, because Saturn is such a fun planet. So let's say it's Saturn that's over there, and you've got the sun in the 6th, and there's Saturn over there, and it's in your own chart. Let's just do it like that. So what do? If you get up to the 9th house, you can get above it, right? You can have a philosophical point of view. In this case, since it's Leo, it's like, okay, well, let me check my heart. Let me see what's going on for me with my heart, my courage, my passion. Because, in this dialogue, we're talking, fixed sign. And by this time tomorrow night, we're going to have a T-square with the moon in Aquarius and the sun in Taurus and Jupiter in Scorpio. So that'll be a very interesting T-square. But let's get back to getting on top of the chart. So now you can look down on this potentially polarizing energy and aspect. So yeah, philosophical heart, being able to see both sides because you're up there above the chart. So in most cases, the midpoint is almost always going to be on like the right side of the chart. It'll likely be somewhere like the 7th house is like if you're dealing with 10th, 4th opposition, 7th house becomes the midpoint. It's relationship. Get somebody else's opinion, right? Instead of being polarized, get another person's opinion. If you have a 2nd and 8th house opposition, then the midpoint is going to be the 11th house. And then you could talk to your friends or take it before a group, or have a group experience or group activity. It's another version of this. So you're always wanting to kind of go up one level. Again, most of the time it's going to be near at the top of the chart, which gives perspective and objectivity. So just something for you to think about with the, because sometimes oppositions can be really difficult. Again, if you're not paying attention, all of a sudden, wham, you get hit, you get blindsided with an opposition. And the one thing that, again, is quite helpful is if you can kind of move around the opposition a little bit. Don't get stuck. Don't get paralyzed. Go over to the other side. Hit that midpoint. And then if you go to the other side, I mean, and you could think about this too, is that oppositions, well, they're 180 degrees when you're looking at it from this perspective. But if the wheel is 360, then an opposition becomes a loop. And it allows you to move and orbit from one point of view to the other, from one point of view to the other, and not getting stuck or polarized. And I think that's probably a pretty sound way to go about it as well. So when we get into Sun-Jupiter oppositions, they're very different than, let's say, Sun-Saturn. Sun-Jupiter oppositions almost like have too much potential or too much opportunity, or too many gifts in some ways. And can you take advantage of them, right? And when I say take advantage of them, it's all about timing and find, one of them that you'd want to bring in to your sphere. Another thing with this Jupiter-Sun opposition, sometimes we may not always be able to see ourselves very clearly, because Jupiter makes everything bigger, expands everything, right? So outside of ourselves, things become very big, because that's the nature of theoretically the opposition, and for good or bad. If it's a fear and Jupiter's expanding in that, which it can, it's not a good thing. If Jupiter's expanding in terms of potency and abundance and potential, then that's actually a pretty good thing. So just a few notes here, just a few. We got Saturn, of course, in Capricorn. It is retrograde. Saturn's gone retrograde. And it's going to go all the way back to 2 degrees. I'm just telling you right now, do not sleep on this Saturn cycle that we're in. It's a huge cycle, and it offers up so much in terms of the potential for change in each one of our lives. Because what's it going to do? It's going to conjunct Pluto in 2020. And then next year, we've got Jupiter and Sagittarius. And the following year, we've got Jupiter and Capricorn, which is that, I think the last time was what, the 90s? I think it was the 90s. I think it might have been the early 90s. And then before that, I think it was 1961. Was it every 30 years? I think it's every 30 years you get that Jupiter Saturn conjunction in Capricorn. And that's an interesting conjunction, because Saturn is where we, put our shovel into the ground and we work and we have discipline, structure, and order. And then Jupiter is the opportunity. So if you start now, whatever you want to wrap your head around. And you see, this is why I'm talking about physical. Because look at where the planets are. We've got Saturn in Capricorn, Pluto in Capricorn. Well, there's Mars in Capricorn, and it's going to be there for a while. And then it goes into Aquarius and it retrogrades. But just Saturn and Pluto, and then we have Uranus and Taurus. So we have 3 planets that are going to be in Earth, so that will be in Earth signs. It's a big deal. It's a really, really big deal. So this is why I say think about physicality, think about material. I'm not saying material in the sense that 1970s materialism or the 80s conspicuous consumption materialism. No, this is very, very different. So just keep your head wrapped around it, because the next few years, in terms of materiality, making things, building things, even starting businesses, believe it or not, that's right. Yes, it can happen, because the hard work is taking place now. And 2 years from now, when that Jupiter conjunction with Saturn, that's when the benefits pay. That's when the derivatives kick in. So just keep that in mind. Keep it in mind. So Saturn is going to go retrograde, and one of the things that's always interesting during a retrograde Saturn cycle is looking at places in your past where you were not always as disciplined or structured or ordered as you would like to have been, but also looking at this whole notion of external structuralization, like the structure that came from your parents or your family or the school that you went to or the time that you grew up in. Because this is a time where you can, find a more internalized version of this. One of the things that I've been working on here, like in my own life, is this whole notion of the will and how we can get in touch with the will. Well, here we go. Here's Chiron and Aries. And Aries is the will. So with Chiron, we're looking at our wounded will. Where did our will get wounded? Where did our will get, where did we allow people to abscond with it? Whoever they were, lovers, husbands, wives, parents, to some degree, maybe institutions, where it doesn't really matter. It's like, where did we let it go? And where did we wind up agreeing to things that we really didn't want to agree to, or probably shouldn't have? Because the other side of Aries is Libra, right? So if we're dealing with the Achilles of Chiron, it's going to be Libra. And it's going to be, where those agreements or where those relationships, to some extent, subverted our own will. So remember that. This is where we are right now in zero Chiron. So this really interesting time. You just look at, the planets that we're dealing with. We're dealing with a radical reorientation in relationship with materiality. That's Taurus. We've got Saturn in Capricorn, which is all about inner authority, especially if you're, a millennial and you're going through your Saturn return, or you're like myself going through your Saturn return. It's funny. I've got Saturn in Capricorn, and I moved to a place where basically the local animal's the goat. So I'm surrounded by goats in this town. It's very interesting. It's like, oh, wow. Look at me. Look where I went to. I went to Goatland. We still have that tricky Neptune and Pisces. Wow. Like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, Neptune was squaring Saturn. And that's when we got into fake news crisis. And Saturn in Sagittarius was really trying to, bear down and, get real hardcore with the truth. And the Neptune square was making it very, very difficult. Very difficult to do that. So, but Neptune is still there. It's still in Pisces. And, and I think that's actually added to this miasma of like, what's the truth? Where's the truth? Who's got the truth? I think that's part of where we are with Neptune and Pisces. And if you look at the United States chart, the United States chart is going through a Neptune opposition. And let me go into the US chart. Let me just find this here. Give me 1 second. I don't want to bring you some information that's not going to be truthful and valid. Give me 1 sec. All right. I'm sorry. So, I often feel like I don't talk enough about other countries, and maybe I'll do that next weekend. Maybe I'll get into some astrology of other countries. Because I talk about the United States a lot. Of course, I live here. I wasn't born here. but there's a reason for it. So yes, the United States natal Neptune is at 22 Virgo. So in roughly 2.5 years, the United States is going to go through a Neptune opposition. And to me, that's a complete spiritual crisis. That's what I'm seeing here. So I think one of the other reasons why materiality, when I say materiality, please don't misconstrue that I'm not like just, touting materialism. That's not true at all. If anything, I'm looking at this upcoming opposition with Neptune and Neptune because we're dealing with spirited matter. And it's Pisces, which is spirit, and Virgo is matter. So we're coming to a very important point here in this country's evolution. At the same time, I think right around then, 2.5 years from now, 3 years, let's call it 3 years from now, because it's a long cycle with Neptune. Pluto is going to be at around 25, 26 Capricorn, about 3.5 years from now. So, it's going to be the Pluto return of the country, the Neptune opposition. Hello. Batten down the hatches. So the reason why I'm touting the connection with materiality is because it's grounding. It's grounding. What's going to go on in the world around us, this much I know, is we're going to get more chaos and more chaos and more chaos and more chaos and more chaos, which is cool. I'm fine with it. I like chaos. In fact, I probably like it a bit too much. But with chaos, we have all these different competing models of reality. So just remember that as well. A lot of stuff slips through the cracks. And you just have to be really, really careful that you're not being led astray and being, basically, gatekeeped or goat-keeped into another pen. So the message here of materiality is engage with it because it's going to ground you during the times that we're in. So making things, growing things, building things, mending things, these are all really important. Terra firma. And with Uranus and Taurus, I went through like the couple of interviews I did, I went through the doom and gloom. I was the doom patrol. And yeah, there is a lot of that. Don't get me wrong. I mean, clearly they want to take us cashless, and we're probably going to see that with Uranus and Taurus. I think it's probably when Saturn is going to move into Aquarius and square Uranus. That's what I don't think it's going to happen during Saturn and Capricorn, but Saturn and Aquarius, yes. I think that's when and that's going to be 3 years from now. So a lot of the stuff that I've done the walk on the dark side with, that stuff is all pretty valid and real. What's coming. Wait for the robot soldiers. Oh, by the way, another car in Arizona killed somebody, and it wasn't Uber this time. It was Waymo, who was one of the competitors. In fact, Uber had to pay Waymo a bunch of money because they basically stole their automatic car technology, driverless car technology. Anyway, when are they going to wise up? When is Arizona going to wise up? Boggles my mind. Absolutely boggles my mind. So while you can, get grounded, do something that's going to ground you, in a different kind of way. Took it upon myself tonight to, this is not anything like amazing, but I took it upon myself tonight to make a new food item that I've never made before. I don't want it to count out of the bag though, because I'm working on some things. Let's get back to the chart of the moment, shall we? You know what I'm gonna have to do? I'm gonna have to get up and get my power cord here soon, which I don't want to do because it'll break the continuity. But if we're gonna go deeper into the show, I'll probably have to do that. Let's see. So what else we have? Well, tomorrow when you wake up, the moon's going to be in Aquarius, and that's for wherever you are on the planet. So what are you going to do tomorrow when you wake up and you go to work? Well, probably one of the things that would be really great is have that Aquarian moon, kind of quirky, open, uh, communal kind of way about you. Now, the moon is in square with, let's see, what do we got? Well, it's in square with Uranus by degree. By the way, Uranus goes into Taurus 9 days from today. Goes back again to Aries one more time. So, but it's going to be interesting. It's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens here over the course of the next few weeks. What else is really interesting is what's happened with Mueller and this judge that basically cracked his nuts. And I thought with Saturn retrograde that was actually pretty appropriate because Saturn in Capricorn, it is the judges. Sagittarius writes the laws. Saturn, Capricorn, they're the ones that enforce them. So now we have Saturn retrograde. Maybe this will actually be better for Trump for a while. It'll get it out of that opposition that he's been going through with his Cancer planets. Be interesting. And now what did Trump do? Didn't he invite Colin Kaepernick to the White House for a race summit? This is so fascinating watching what's going on. Sometimes it's like, I don't think Trump is playing 5D checkers, let alone 5D chess. And then there are times where I'm like, wow, it's really fascinating. Like if you look at the big picture, I follow David Hogg quite a bit on Twitter, and they are just so going after the 16, 17, 18, 19, 20-year-olds. Like they're not even going after the millennials. Everything David Hogg and his posse are doing are going towards the youth because this is the next wave that the Democrats want to capture somehow. And then I see what's going on with Kanye, whatever Kanye is. I don't know. It's like, I think he got wiped, but I've gotten in some heat because I brought it up. But I think he got wiped. I think he had electroshock therapy because when he came out, man, Kanye was zombified. He was like, nobody home. Hello. And then right around November of 2017, he comes back and he takes the stage with Kid Cudi, and they do Gold Diggers, and it's right around the same time, by the way, QAnon comes on the scene. Now, I'm not saying that the two are the same, but it's interesting, right? So now you have Kanye and Candace Owens, and boy, there's so much shit going on. It's really interesting to watch and pushing a lot of buttons, a lot of people's buttons, which I think is interesting, to be honest with you. So Trump now wants to have a summit on race in the White House with Kanye and Colin Kaepernick. Now, Kanye could show up, but Kaepernick, I think Kaepernick has a Sun-Pluto conjunction in Scorpio. It's really tight too. So he's very secretive. Like this whole time, like this last year, he's totally become a full-on Scorpio. Just didn't know what he's up to. Every now and then he'd have an event where he'd give out some suits or get an award, and you'd see him then. Like nobody knows what's really going on with Kaepernick. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I think he has a moon in Aries, if I'm not mistaken. So this Uranus in Aries was conjuncting his moon. So it was, radicalizing his emotional state. He does not get along with his birth mother either. They're so estranged. And it's funny because his birth mother's last name is Russo. And Russo is red. and Capricorn has an Aries moon. She has a red moon or a red mother. Is that interesting? Astrology is a trip. The more I'm telling you, I've been doing this for 10 years now, and the tumblers are just like clicking into place. And I'm just like seeing stuff all the time now. It's like kind of mind blowing, really, really mind blowing. I was thinking about my son, and I remember he had the eclipse on his son on March 8th in 2016, and he became a different kid after that. Like, it was so bizarre to watch this stuff. Like, my son at one point was like really good at baseball, really confident. And then after that happened, it was like I didn't even recognize my kid on the field half the time. So bizarre, incredibly bizarre. And yesterday I had this. So on Friday, longtime friend, client, and we're working on Chiron, and he, I mentioned this on Facebook, and we're getting into his 12th house. He's got Pluto in his 12th house. His grandfather died at his home, when he was 5 years old, and had Crohn's disease. And his Virgo mother wound up taking her father back in because the father's wife left him. And so she became like the de facto wife in some ways. A lot of weird stuff. I mean, there's a lot of really interesting things. And of course, the 12th house is opposite the 6th. That's Virgo's house. And, what do we get into there? We get into things like health and healing, and even all those Virgo kinds of parts in the body, like the stomach and the intestines. And he has Chiron in Taurus, and we're getting into that and the body and what that means, and dealing with the body. And the other side of that, of course, is Scorpio. Scorpio is death, and Taurus is the body, it's life. So I'm going on this riff with him, and just, going around the chart and unpacking some things. And I told him about this book called Dream Body by Arnold Mindell. And I had heard Arnold Mindell when I was in my 20s. I think I was around 25. And at that time, I was a mailman. I've had a lot of jobs. And I was what's called a rural route carrier. It was one of the best jobs I ever had. It was on the northern coast of California. I had my own car. It was great. Get up in the morning, get there early, sort the mail, put it in my car, bang, 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 be done by 2:33, hit the beach with my dog, go for a run, and it was a good life. So during the day, certain days, I listened to the radio, and there was this one guy named Will Nofke, and he had a show called New Dimensions. And Will had a New Age center in Berkeley. I went to a couple of events there back in the 80s. And he was talking with Arnold Mindell. And Mindell was talking about, the whole premise of Dream Body is that the body knows how to heal itself. Like, if we're in touch with the body, we really, really are in touch with it. And we, instead of avoiding the pain, go into the pain. The body acknowledges that it's being seen and recognized. And then we'll cooperate, because the body itself is an entity unto itself, right? There's a whole autonomic system that's going on that most cases we're just not, we're not aware of. So he's been working. Mindell works with was working with a number of terminal patients at that time, and he was working with this guy in a hospital, and the guy was in there for stomach cancer. So Mindell started to touch his stomach and go deep. After he didn't just walk into the room and start touching his stomach. It's like, hey, buddy, I'm a psychologist. Did I touch your stomach? They didn't do that. Of course, he had to build some trust there. So he went in there and basically said, yeah, go ahead. And he started massaging his stomach. He went deeper and deeper and deeper. And it was right on that area that was where the tumor was. And the man would just go into this incredible pain and screaming and weeping. And he realized that, he'd stored up all this anger and all these memories, which he was able to see when Mindell got into his abdomen and started pressing down really hard. And he just kept doing it and pressing through it. And, he broke ground through to the other side. And the guy um, wound up getting through the pain. Now, his cancer didn't heal, but he wound up actually being um, much more at ease in his physical body and reconciled emotionally as well. So I told my client about this. I told him about the book and the experience because it got back to his grandfather and stuffing the gut, right? Stuffing the gut. And then the sixth house and Taurus and, well, Chiron and Taurus in his chart, which is in the seventh. And so he unpacked a bunch of books from a guy who we both knew and was a mentor of his and a very, very good friend of mine and a client as well. I did a lot of really deep work with this fellow, and he died a couple of years ago. He left my client a treasure trove of books, everything from astrology to mythology, esoterica, psychology, parapsychology, you name it. It was in this big collection. He was going through it, and sort of buried in there was a copy of Dream Body by Arnold Mindell. You just can't make this stuff up, right? I mean, what are the odds that we would have that conversation? And I would share the story about Mindell and wrap it back to his grandfather and the Crohn's and the trouble with the gut and the 12th house. The 12th house is where we stuff things, by the way. If you weren't aware of that, it's where we stuff things. Everything gets stuffed in the 12th house. Whatever we don't resolve, that's where it goes and hangs out. When you have a Saturn return or a Saturn 12th house transit, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But what are the odds, right? What are the odds that, I would be listening to the radio that one day, and I'd read a little bit of Arnold's book, but it was really the radio piece that really popped for me. What are the odds of me listening to that radio on that day and listening to Mindell and every single piece of that story, and that one that really jumped out at me? That was in 1985. And here we are, 2018, and it's so. This is going to, I'm telling you, this Uranus and Taurus is going to be very interesting. I think it's going to be highly synchronistic in a lot of ways. Because if you look at where Saturn is for, this summer, Saturn's going to be in trine with be retrograde, but it'll be in trine with Uranus in Taurus. So it'll be very, very interesting. I'm digging it. I'm really digging it. I think it's going to be very cool and allow us to go backwards in time a little bit. Venus is in Aries, and it's going to be conjuncting. We're going to have a Venus-Uranus conjunction in Taurus in the not too distant future, right? Yeah, that's happening. That's coming. That's going to be very interesting. Let's take a look at that when that's going to take place. My battery's getting low, so I'm gonna have to get up and get my cord, which I don't really want to. Why don't I do this? Let me get my cord. It'll take me 20 seconds. We'll use this as a natural break. And if you want to, you can go to the ephemeris, play with it yourself, and find out, where we're going to get that Venus conjunction with Uranus coming up. I'll be right back. Hold on. All right, I'm back. Reunited, and it feels so good. Let me just check in with the chat room. Let's see how you guys are doing in there. Catch up on the chat. Let's see what we got here. Let's see. Synchronicity, Tanya. Pluto and Uranus in the 12th here. Whoa! It's a deep inner life. Pluto Uranus conjunction. Venus is already in Gemini. Oh, sorry. What was I thinking? Lynn, you're right. You know what you know what I was looking at? What the heck was I looking at? What is going on here? Hold on. Where's that chart of the moment? Yep, my bad. I don't know why. So it's already past Taurus. Thank you, Lynn. Keep me honest here. Yeah, that was really weird. I was looking at the chart of the moment. Let me get back in there. What was I seeing? Mercury. Mercury. My bad. My bad. I didn't catch the little horn. So we're going to have the Mercury Uranus conjunction in Taurus. Thank you, Lynn. Lynn always keeps me straight. She's good at that. Let's see. Let me go back into the chat room. See what else is happening. Dragged myself in late tonight. Well, you made it. Yeah, Mercury. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it was Mercury. I was like not paying attention to the horns. You can get interested in the paranormal, life after death things. Yeah, very much so. You know, Pluto in the 12th house is really difficult, but it's like a master's program. You know, it really, really is. If you have Pluto in the 12th house, you're going to go through stuff in your life, and ultimately, you know, what is the lesson? It's like no fear of death. That's what Pluto in the 12th house is. It's like no fear of death, and you know, having profound contact with, in some ways, supernatural forces as well. So if you know, and if you have a Uranus Pluto conjunction, well, you could go through periods where things could happen really quickly. Like you could have your, you know, the top of your head blown off really quickly with stuff, and you know, try and have to integrate that. That was about Uranus in the eighth. Oh, Uranus in the eighth. Oh, okay, but still the same. The Uranus in the eighth is a little bit different, right? So, like Uranus in the 12th can almost be like um, divine intervention at times. You know, like angels at the 11th hour, or you know, the lightning bolt of inspiration at 3 a.m, or you know, having an unusual muse. What is the 12th house? Is that relative to one's natal first house? Yeah, it's the house, you know. So just to give you an idea, again, basic kind of astrology here, when we take our first breath, we come into the chart, right? You know, first breath, right? First house. Okay. Then going all the way around the chart, which is what we do in life. The chart is a journey through life. So when you are working theoretically and you have like your peak experience, that's, you know, that's 10th house. And you're in your 10th house, basically. I mean, if we're using older model, you know, because, you know, people that are working at Walmart at 70 years old, or they're in their 10th house and they really shouldn't be at that point, unless they really love working at Walmart, which somehow I don't think they do. And then once you're done, you go to the 11th house. The 11th house is like 65 or 70 and beyond. And that's when you can, you know, do philanthropic stuff, belong to organizations, kind of give back to the world, you know, go down to the VFW and play, you know, bridge with your buddies, or, you know, pie gal with your girls, or, you know, that's like, you know, friends, groups, taking it easy, giving back. And then that cycle comes to an end. And then you're in the 12th house. And then you're getting ready to what? You're getting to leave the chart. And in many cases, what happens? You go to a hospital, or you go to a hospice, right? And these are 12th house institutions. So we have a literal representation of the 12th house. And then we have the kind of metaphysical or the esoteric version of the 12th house, which is leaving the chart and leaving your story, your personal story. So we go around the chart. We come in, right? So the 12th house is the house of the soul. That's my personal opinion of the 12th house. It's the house of the soul. I mean, it's like there's layers, right? There's, you know, the social version of the 12th house. which is, again, things like hospitals and sanitariums and prisons and halfway houses and crack dens and shooting galleries and brothels and temples and nunneries. I mean, all those places that we don't go to. Those are all 12th house, right? But that's up here. And there are people that have 12th house planets. You don't get why the 4th house is related to endings. Well, the only thing that I think we can make a correlation with the 4th house, well, is that when you get to the 4th house, you're at the nadir of the chart. Okay, so it like the chart bottoms out in the 4th house, and then what happens is that at that point, and let's use Saturn as like a chronometer here. So Saturn in the 12th house would be to some degree bottoming out. And then as it rises, it begins to move up towards the top of the chart. So I don't really think that the 12th house, 4th house is like a terminus, but you are at the bottom of your chart. And so what you're doing is you're encapsulating. So when you get up to like the top of your chart, when Saturn is going through the 10th house, it's a really important time. And it comes all the way around. And then by the time it gets to the bottom of your chart, it's finally the end of like that 15-year cycle when it was up at the top. So that part does come to an end. And then it starts over again. And as it starts to rise again, begins to gain more and more momentum. But I've seen the 8th house be a total house of endings. When you have Saturn going through your 8th house, get ready. You are going to, I wish Chiron issues could be resolved. Conjunct midheaven is very hard. Well, if you want to be a healer for a living, it's not that hard. It is not that hard. I mean, let's be honest with you. Okay. It would be easier than looking at Chiron as something that makes you vulnerable to the world. Because it does. Chiron brings up vulnerability. This Chiron in Aries transit is going to be really interesting for everybody. Joe says, my son is in the 12th house, Cancer for almost 40 years. I've dealt with depression, suicide. That's a feeling that I want to go home. Yeah, sun in the 12th house is difficult. You know what you do when you have sun in the 12th house? You move. That's what you do. You move. You go to a place where that sun line right on the ascendant. In many cases, you don't have to move far. So, I would say, and I've talked to people about this. Well, you could move, and get that sun out of your 12th house, and your life would be, trust me, it's different. When you move and the chart gets relocated, it's a big deal. It's a really, really big deal. Tanya says, my Saturn is a few degrees from my IC. Is that transiting or in your natal chart? Well, I did an astrophotography, and it said Milan, Italy. Well, guess what, Joe? Ryan's getting ready to leave home and go away to college. It's never too late. I could think of worse things than living in Milan, Italy. They would love you there, Joe. They would love you. They'd call you Mamma Mia. So you have Saturn conjunct the IC. That's difficult. That's a difficult place for Saturn. It's just hard. It's just hard. You grew up in a difficult household sometimes, a lot of structure. Depending upon what the aspects are, it could be a very difficult relationship with the father. Well, it's if it's ingressing. If it's within 3 degrees, it's there. And it's moving into. Anytime a planet is within 5 degrees of the next house, you begin to read for that house. Remember that. Okay. So let's say you have Saturn that's 4 degrees away from the IC. It's kind of in the 3rd still. You read it for the 3rd and you read it for the 4th. Okay. So just remember that 5 degrees on it, within 5 degrees of the next house, you're starting to read for that house. I want to talk about Uranus in the 8th house because we sort of toss that around a little bit. And Uranus in the 8th house is supernatural. Like, strange, bizarre, interesting, unusual, parapsychological stuff. will come up with Uranus in the eighth house. And the other thing with Uranus in the eighth house is that there are times when, without any kind of like volition, you can feel really exposed with Uranus in the eighth house, and like everybody can like see you and see into your, sort of the dark corners and the hidden fold, right? Until you get used to it, and then because part of what Uranus in the eighth house is there to do is, for transparency, help you with transparency. The other thing with Uranus in the eighth house is also sudden wealth. People can have sudden wealth with Uranus in the eighth, especially if it's other people's money, dealing with, wills, testaments, legacies, sudden wealth. You can also, lose money very quickly with Uranus in the 10th as well. But you can get, it could be outrageous wealth sometimes with Uranus in the 12th. And I'll tell you another little Uranus tidbit here. So apparently, people with Uranus in the 8th can predict their own death. I've never run across anybody like that. But you look it up. It's one of those little astrological nuggets. And apparently, people with Venus in the 8th supposedly live a very long time. And Mars in the 8th, guess what you get? You get a violent death. Did I ever tell you guys my Mars 8th house story? Did I ever tell you that story? So, true story. Some of you have heard it before, but I'll tell it again because we got some new people. A true story. It's about 1 o'clock in the morning, and no, you haven't. What's that? My Mars. Okay. Okay. All right. So here's the story. So it's about 1:30 in the morning, and we're driving. It was me and my girlfriend at that time, and we had this kind of crazy, kooky relationship. It was a lot of strange synchronicities, but a lot of fun. So there's nobody out. It's like, it's the coast highway, Southern Oregon, 1:30 in the morning. And I'm talking with her about Mars in my 8th house. And I said, I think it was about like 30 at the time. I said, I have Mars in my 8th house. And I'm supposed to die a violent death. And as soon as I said that, out of nowhere, and I'm telling you, there's nobody on the road. It's 1:30 in the morning, Oregon coast. And this cat comes running across the highway, like right at that moment. And I swerved to miss the cat. I almost flipped the car over. It was one of the most bizarre situations I've ever encountered. It was like, okay, let me tell you about my Mars in the 8th. Maybe I better not. Let's just keep that packed away. I have Chiron. I have Chiron transiting, and it's squaring my Mars right now. And I get really, this is so fascinating. I've really gotten into, like, again, this whole notion of will, because Aries is will. And Chiron in Aries, in many cases, is the wounded will. All right. So squaring my Mars, it also has to deal with anger and aggression. And, and I've been really looking at stuff that I've, done, either intently or inadvertently, where, even over the course of the last year where this square was coming in, and it was like, this need to be right, or this desire to get my point across. And I've just looked at some of the situations that's kind of reared its head, and I was like, wow. So I'm taking a step back, and I'm looking at a lot of this, like, relationship with Mars and Aries with Chiron. So Tanya says my Chiron in Aries is exactly, well, yeah, because that happens. So Tanya, you going through your Chiron return? Is that what's going on for you? How old are you, Tanya? Can you share with us in the old chat room? You might be going through Chiron return, right? Anyway, my father passed away. Yes, so you're going through your Chiron. My father passed away on the last the last time Chiron was exact during my Chiron return. passed away. I'll never forget that day. 28 degrees Chiron. Last time it was going over. Boom. Done. You'll go through your Chiron return when you're 50, so it'll be what, 2020. Can you believe that? Wow. We're all getting up there, right? 3 years from now, I'll be 60 years old. Wow, it's kind of mind blowing. Yeah, me too, man. I'm sorry about my father. So, but he gave up. But I'll share a really interesting story about my father. So my father and I, we had a lot of conflict. Like, you know, his natal Mars, and so I had a lot of like his natal Mars is in Scorpio too. So let's just say that I had a lot of Mars issues with Dad. Okay. Well, thanks, Slack. So I had a lot of Mars issues with my dad, right? And so we weren't always like, sometimes we'd be really tight and really good, and other times, man, we were just, like oil and water. And but there was a period where my father got red pilled, and it was right around 1994, 95, 96. So all of a sudden, the blinders drop away, and we're having these really interesting discussions about what's going on in the world. We sat down and we watched the Clinton Chronicles together when I was like 35 or 34. We watched the documentary about Waco, which, by the way, if you haven't seen the documentary about Waco, you really should. So what happened was at one point he decided to go back up the rabbit hole. You can't do that. Once you pull the veil away, there's no turning back. You have got to go all the way through to the other side. So what he tried to do was go back because it was too much for him. You can't. And then at that point, he started to lose his will in a lot of ways. And I watched him, and he did all these things that were, it was just a weird end game for him. So then it was worse. It was definitely harder for us to relate. We had lost a pretty significant ground, and I felt like I had lost him at that point. And so he was basically writing his own script to leave. And once you go through, I'm telling you, once you go through the rabbit hole experience, you try to get back out again, the dirt's just going to cave in behind you. You just got to go all the way through now. So that's what happened. And now, luckily, we actually wound up having a really solid time before he split. So, well, hello there, Di Suarez. Welcome to the soiree, the Astro soiree. Hey, so let's do this. Let's do a few charts here. Let's get into some celebrity. I don't want to do big thing, but let's get into it a little bit here. So one of the things that I was noticing, because again, I was getting into, I love old movies, right? I think they're really cool. And I was looking at these charts. Hold on, let me find one. Hold on. Oh, here we go. All right. Give me one sec. Okay. Here we go. Okay. Good. So I'm a big William Holden fan. I think he's a really underrated actor, and I really like Glenn Ford and a lot of the Glenn Ford films. Ford could do anything. He could play comedy. He could be a bad guy. He could be, an action hero. He was really extremely talented. He could play a romantic lead. So I was looking at these guys' charts, So, well, what's going on with them, right? What's happening with their charts? Well, um, I noticed that Glenn Ford is a Taurus. He's born on May 1st in 1916. And if you look at his charts, I mean, everything's above the horizon. There's like, there's no private life. It's all very public, very, very out there. And he's got a nice sextile to Mercury in his charts from Neptune in the 12th. And he's Leo with Mars kind of close to the ascendant. So he could be a little bit forceful. And he has that Sun Moon conjunction in Taurus, balsamic moon. And people have Sun Moon conjunctions. Very interesting. Like on the one side, you have the new moon, and people tend to be very adventurous and they're like initiating. Oh, this is the other cat, by the way. So this is Rosie. She got jealous of Jasper. She wanted her screen time. So when the moon is on the other side, when you have a new moon in your chart, it's about catalyzing things, being adventurous, being a risk taker. The moon is like right there. It's like it's an apple. You just go for it, right? I'm going to do this. So a lot of new moon people tend to be very adventurous people. They have a kind of a youthful exuberance with them. You go all the way to the other side, and when the moon is balsamic, it is anything but that, right? The moon has lost all of its energy, and there's kind of a quiet, sagacious sort of quality to the moon from the balsamic position. It's like, completely different than a new moon. So Glenn Ford has that in his chart. So I was looking at Ford, and he's a Taurus, born May 1st. And then I was looking at William Holden's chart, and Holden's chart is a lot like Glenn Ford's. I mean, everything is almost above the horizon. It's so fascinating. And Holden's a Virgo. So he's always very capable, and he plays very capable roles. So for a guy that has his sun in the 8th house, he was actually, so this is a really good example of relocation. So William Holden moved to California, and I haven't relocated his chart, but just by looking at his chart, that sun goes to the top of the chart, right? So he got out of his 8th house and became a 10th house person. But again, he's an Aries. So you have Holden, Aries, Glenn Ford, Taurus. And then I looked at Gary Cooper's chart. Another one of these guys, strong. And Gary Cooper, Taurus as well. In fact, tomorrow is Gary Cooper's birthday. So another Taurus, very different kind of Taurus, though. Unlike Glenn Ford, whose sun was conjunct his midheaven, Gary Cooper's sun is in his 12th house. Interestingly enough, again, where was he born? He was born in Helena, Montana. So you move Gary Cooper west, and what happens to his sun? Well, it gets into the 1st house, right? So again, but it's going to be Taurus. And so what are they going to see? Gary Cooper, strong, silent type, which means that his midheaven now becomes Capricorn. And people see that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, which he has in his chart. So I thought, okay, so we have these guys. They're all kind of solid in their own way, right? And then I looked at Jimmy Stewart's chart, another kind of early mid-century star. Jimmy Stewart's a Taurus, May 20th. But Jimmy Stewart's got a lot of planets in Gemini, so he's not typical. He also has an Aquarius rising. But I thought this is really interesting that, and this was I was just skimming off the top. And I'm sure I could find a few more. Okay. John Wayne and Errol Flynn are both Geminis. So we're going to take 6 of the biggest stars from that mid-century period, and they're all happening basically from Aries to Gemini. And I thought that's really interesting. Now, there are other actors during that time, like Clark Gable's an Aquarius, John Garfield, I think, is an Aquarius. And then we get out to the later actors. Like, even though Robert Mitchum, it's very funny, like Robert Mitchum and James Stewart were born 4 years apart, but you'd never kind of know it because Mitchum and Stewart were very, very different characters. Robert Mitchum was a Leo, and he's really one of these pivotal people, right, with Leo's sun, and then Pluto and Leo comes in. And that's when Robert Mitchum really begins to sort of take off, is during that Pluto and Leo phase. That's when his career takes off. And he becomes this kind of pivotal persons. Like Pluto plays this role of transformation, and Mitchum, I think, is rated number 23 all time in terms of like stars. And he makes this pivot. Like, Glenn Ford's a really good actor, but he's no Robert Mitchum. And Bill Holden's a really good actor, but he's no Robert Mitchum. And Bogart, who's a Capricorn, is a great actor, but he's no Robert Mitchum. And then after Mitchum, the astrology of Hollywood begins to change, and you begin to see, again, I'm looking sort of at a kind of a big picture. But you see guys like Burt Lancaster as a Scorpio, and Frank Sinatra as a Sagittarius, and Paul Newman, who's an Aquarius. Now, Brando, if I'm not mistaken, I think Brando might be an Aquarius. I'm not sure. I'd have to look that up. But we begin to see more of the outer signs become, kind of, more connected to Hollywood from that star perspective. So I was trying to figure out, well, why is that? Well, if you look at the movie going public, like who was seeing the movies in the 40s and the 50s? It was the Pluto and Cancer people, right? Pluto and Cancer. And they were seeing the movies. And Pluto and Cancer tends to be, it's a very traditional kind of generation. So when you have guys like Gary Cooper and Jimmy Stewart and William Holden, now you've got, I think, what is Cary Grant? I think Cary Grant's a Gemini. There's another guy, Cary Grant, but they're all in that first decan. And so Pluto in Cancer, the Pluto people, they're either going to square some of the Aries, which is whatever, but they're going to be what, in sextile or semi-sextile with people like John Wayne, Errol Flynn. So it's generational, right? You have the Pluto and Cancer people looking at these Taurus figures, these Gemini figures, to some degree, these Aries figures, and they're like of movie age. These are the male. I haven't gotten into the females, but these are the male actors that they're supporting, and they become popular. And when Pluto and Leo comes of age, and they start going to the cinema, and there's that real pivot that takes place, like it's when the stars change. There was a realignment of the universe in Hollywood through Pluto and Leo. And I'll never forget, my great uncle was, I think he might have been a Pluto and Cancer guy, but he was an interesting character. He had a newsstand on the corner of Hollywood and Vine, and he sold papers in Hollywood and Vine during the heyday of the movie business. And everybody would come up and buy papers from him. He knew everybody. And I asked him, well, what was so-and-so like? Oh, great guy, great tipper. And then I was like, he loved John Garfield. And I said, what about David Niven? And he said, cheap son of a bitch. Right? So he really based his love of the stars on, who tipped him. Well, I don't blame him, right? But so I went through all these, all the old guys. Love him. And he told me that Mickey Rooney and his sister used to dress the same. They'd run around in sweatshirts and baggy pants and tennis shoes. Matching sweatshirts, matching baggy pants and tennis shoes. And they would dance around Hollywood together, down the street together. Imagine that. Sitting there watching Mickey Rooney and his sister, So then I started to ask him about the Rat Pack. When I started to bring up the Rat Pack actors, he got a real distant look in his face. It was like he just didn't understand them. And that was at that time, it was for him to close up shop. And that's when Hollywood really changed. And it was Pluto and Leo. It's when the stars changed. In Pluto and Cancer, you have a whole other kind of, let's be clear, William Holden was still a star in the 60s and the 70s, but he certainly wasn't a Steve McQueen style star. Pisces McQueen, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, I just thought it was really interesting. And then looking at who was going to the movies, who was buying the tickets, and what stars and what signs appealed to them. And it's the first decan stars for the most part. basically going from Aries to Cancer. Fascinating stuff. Interesting. At least I thought it was. All right. Hey, listen. So I got a little deal here that I want to share with everybody. Okay. Here's the deal. I'm offering for this week only. This week only. And if you're listening to this broadcast, either live or you're listening to the broadcast, recorded and archived, and I'm going to put it up on Facebook and Twitter one time, that if you buy a reading or get a reading this week, I will include a free reading, but it has to be for your mother. Okay? Think about that now. I will take a spiritual mother. I'll give you a little bit of latitude there. So this week only, this is a way for you to get a reading and to give a gift. It's only going to be for this week. So it's a 2-for-1. It's a rare deal, but this is my way to honor mothers, your mothers, and mothers in general. For me to go out and, 2-for-1 reading. It's got to be a mother, physical mother or a spiritual mother. And I got a little bit of latitude with the spiritual mother piece. Okay. So where are we? But only for 1 week. 1 week only. And by the way, if you are interested in astrology and you want to learn astrology, I have a 16-hour course on my site that has videos, it has charts, lab work. That's on my site. And I think it's a really good course, especially for the money. There are other people out there who have really expensive courses, and they're not half as good, at least as I think. So that's on my website as well. Waiting for my advanced course. Yeah, well, that's actually a pretty good idea. But I've got that. The thing that happened with me in that course is I ran across my buddy Ethan, and it was just like one of those things that just happened. And Ethan's too busy now, so it may be a while for the course, the advanced. But I tell you what we're going to do. I'm going to start doing some webinars, and basically, it's navigating your life through the chart and learning how to navigate your life through the chart. So that'll be coming up, and I still think I have about 6 or 7 courses or live sessions on the course that I need to finish up as well. So I'm do those. There's a lot of activity happening now. A lot of activity. Okay, I'm going to get on out of here. Well, thank you for joining me and being a part of the live stream tonight and live courses. Yeah, live webinars. That's right, Len. Yeah. I have Angora goats near Kerrville. They raise goats for wool, for organic man. Okay. Linda, could you send me an email? Goats are my new thing. They're my new thing. Ask about a wood statue. Oh, the wood statue. You guys see the wood statue? So the wood statue is from Africa, and a friend of mine gave it to me a long time ago. And he's like my wise man. He's my wise man from Sirius. Hold on. Here's my wise man from Sirius right here. I've had this guy since 95. He is a cone head. I'm telling you, man. This guy's a Dogon. He's from another planet, right? Would you mess with this dude? Look at him. He's a badass, right? Total badass. Hopefully he's on my side. Go clean them up. One time, my girlfriend came over and told me to get rid of it. So that's bad luck. It's bad juju. You think it's bad juju? What do you think? I think it's all right. Okay. Thank you. Right. Thank you. Thank you. I'll be back tomorrow morning. 15 minutes of flame. Linda, anybody know? I'll put it in here, Linda. Hold on. There you go. There you go. So hit me with some goat info. All right. Good night, everybody. Have a great week. I'll be back next week and check out 15 minutes this week, starting tomorrow. Take care. Good night.